Welcome back. This is The Real Story, where we're going to take the time to give context to some of the events that go on during the 2016 race for the White House. Sometimes we'll have to go back a few days, weeks, or months, sometimes years, to find everything that's still relevant. As we find out today, especially, history does repeat itself. For nearly as long as people have identified with one group over another, there have been refugees. All it's taken is one group being in power and deciding that another group was no longer welcome, or even worse, would be killed if they stayed around. Situations like that have been tracked all the way back to 740 BC, when 10 of the roughly 12 tribes in the region were forced out of what is today ancient Israel. What we'll focus on today are the refugee situations that the modern world would have encountered and how they've reacted to them. About a decade into the 20th century was World War I. Roughly 200,000 Belgians were chased out of their homeland when the Germans invaded, and many of the Belgians went to Britain, where the government warmly offered them the hospitality of the British nation. There was some tension during the war, but when it was all over, many of the Belgians returned to their homeland. 27 years after the First World War, the Second World War broke out, and many more people were displaced while German forces made their way through the continent. For much of that war, the United States didn't take many special actions trying to help the Jewish refugees being chased by the Nazis. In June of 1939, 300,000 refugees were applying for just 27,000 visas set by quotas in the U.S. Those quotas didn't change until 1944, when FDR created the War Refugee Board to partner with a bunch of international organizations to save the Jewish people in Europe. By then, though, the Holocaust had already been going on for roughly a decade. What did happen was the creation of a number of groups and laws to help with refugees in the future, like the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. The end of the 20th century and the start of the 21st century gave us two very different refugee situations. In the early 90s, 2.7 million refugees were forced to flee from Bosnia. Tens of thousands landed in Western nations, mostly the United States and Germany. But in 2003, civil war in Darfur displaced 2.5 million people. Years later, nearly all of them are still on the run in their own country, with a few 100,000 living in refugee camps in Chad. When American forces went into Iraq in 2003, that started a stretch where nearly 5 million Iraqis would leave their home and about 2 million of them would flee the country. Many of them went to nearby states like Jordan, Syria, or Lebanon, but often were faced with more violence there. Now, some of them are running from the Syrian conflict too, and finding an international community with mixed reactions to their effort to leave the region. Roughly 4 million Syrians are on the run now. Almost 2 million of them are in neighboring Turkey. It's way more than that country can handle, but it's one of the closest nations around. Lebanon has about 1 million refugees in a country that only has 4 million people. Jordan and Iraq have both taken in plenty too. In Europe, Germany has received the most applications for refugees, and they're leading the way with Sweden trying to get quotas implemented that would spread the refugees around the continent. France, even after the terror attacks and fears about security breaches if more refugees come in, is committed to 30,000 more refugees. The United States has pledged to take in 10,000 Syrians, even with those strong concerns about screening procedures from politicians and citizens alike.
As Francois has said, our humanitarian duty to help desperate refugees and our duty to our security, those duties go hand in hand. On the Statue of Liberty, a gift from the people of France, there are words we know so well. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to be free.
Over the course of modern history, there's rarely been an extended period of time that didn't see a group of people needing a new and safe place to live. Just as common as the need appears to be the ability for other countries to be slow lending a helping hand. The point is that for all the debate it's creating around the world today, this problem is hardly a new one. Coming up after the break, the presidential candidate who's taking to Twitter to call out the entire Republican presidential field.